George Springer trade rumors are heating up, and this one it's different for Blue Jays Nation. A source has connected Toronto's leadoff man back to the Houston Astros. And if this happens before Monday's deadline, it fundamentally changes the outfield picture at the Rogers Center for the stretch run. Let's get into it immediately, because this isn't some throwaway rumor from a random insider account. This is ESPN reporting on a match between two organizations that have made business with each other before. And the framework here makes a disturbing amount of sense if you're looking at this from a pure asset management perspective. Here's the situation in Toronto. The Blue Jays are dealing with a final guaranteed year Springer 6-year, $150 million free agency deal. The one he signed back in January 2021 after that World Series run with Houston. That contract carries a $25 million average annual value. And in year 6, Springer is still owed a substantial chunk of that money, likely in the $20 to $22 million range, depending on how the deferred structure was built into the original deal. For a front office that ESPN describes as being in offload mode, that's a significant liability sitting on the books, especially with Toronto having already made major long-term financial commitments elsewhere on the roster. Think Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s extension, Bo Bichette's arbitration and extension situation, and the money already locked into the rotation with Kevin Gausman and Jose Berrios. From a competitive balance tax perspective, this is where it gets interesting. If the Blue Jays are approaching or have crossed into CBT territory this season, moving Springer's remaining salary, even if Toronto has to eat a portion of it, which they almost certainly would in any realistic scenario, gives John Schneider's front office real payroll flexibility heading into an offseason where they'll need to make decisions on their own pending free agents and potential extensions. This is textbook rebuild on the fly asset management. You're not necessarily selling because you're bad. You're selling because the roster construction demands it. And Springer, at 37 years old and on an expiring non-controllable contract, is exactly the type of asset that gets moved even by teams that still believe they can compete. Now, let's talk about what Springer actually looks like on the field in 2026, because this is where the StatCast data tells a real story. Springer's exit velocity numbers have been trending in a direction you'd expect from a player entering his late 30s. Nothing catastrophic. But the peak bat speed and hard hit rate simply aren't what they were during his 4-time All-Star peak. His OPS this season reflects a player who still has value against certain pitching matchups, but has clearly lost a step athletically. And that's the crux of the defensive conversation here. Springer has logged a grand total of 7 innings in the outfield in 2026. 7 innings. He's been almost exclusively a designated hitter for Toronto this year, which tells you everything about where his body is at physically and why John Schneider's coaching staff has managed his workload the way they have. So here's the roster puzzle for Houston. If this trade actually gets done, Yordan Alvarez owns a DH spot. That's not up for debate. That's about as locked in as any roster spot in baseball. So if Houston acquires Springer, he's playing left field. Now, is that a viable everyday defensive alignment for a player who's barely touched the outfield this season? The counter-argument from the Houston side is that Springer, even in decline, still has elite baseball instincts. He knows Dakin Park's dimensions, as well as anyone who's ever worn an Astros uniform. And the shorter porch in left field at that ballpark is genuinely more forgiving for an aging outfielder than most parks around the league. It's not a perfect fit, but it's not the disaster some analysts are framing it as either. Let's shift to the Blue Jays' return, and what this means for the depth chart. If Toronto is fielding calls on Springer and genuinely wants him off the books, they're not going to be commanding a significant prospect package back. Not for a 37-year-old rental on an expiring deal where they're likely attaching money to facilitate the move. Realistically, this looks like a change of scenery salary dump more than a true baseball trade, and that changes the return profile. Toronto isn't getting a top 100 prospect here. They might be looking at a lower-level lottery ticket arm out of Houston's system, or simply salary relief with a marginal player coming back to balance out the transaction for CBT accounting purposes. But here's what actually matters for the Blue Jays roster construction moving forward. Who plays right field and who takes at-bats at DH once Springer is gone. Dalton Varsho has been the gold glove caliber piece in this outfield mix. And as Springer departs, you likely see more consistent playing time funneled toward Nathan Lukes and Alan Roden, both of whom have shown flashes of being everyday caliber bats at the major league level. Roden in particular has intriguing underlying metrics. His plate discipline numbers and barrel rate this season suggest a player who could handle an increased workload if given the opportunity. This is where player development pays off. If Toronto's front office is comfortable trusting internal options, that's further evidence of a franchise pivoting toward a younger, cost-controlled core rather than continuing to pay premium dollars for declining veteran production. From a batting order perspective, John Schneider has to get creative if Springer exits the lineup. Springer has spent significant time in the leadoff spot for Toronto over the years, and while his OBP metrics have softened, he's still provided professional at-bats at the top of the order. Removing him means Bichette likely slides into a more net leadoff or two-hole role, depending on health, with Guerrero anchoring the middle of the order as the unquestioned cleanup presence. The lineup construction becomes more top-heavy on youth and less reliant on the proven vet model that's defined the Blue Jays' competitive windows since 2020. There's also a sentimental layer here that shouldn't be ignored, even in an analytical breakdown like this one. Springer's tenure in Houston included 3 All-Star selections and, of course, that 2017 World Series run, a chapter of Astros history that comes with its own complicated legacy given the sign-stealing scandal, but one that undeniably shaped Springer's career trajectory and market value heading into free agency. A reunion narrative writes itself for content and fan engagement purposes, even if the on-field logic is murkier than the feel-good story suggests. Teams do move on emotion and locker room culture sometimes, not just spreadsheets, and Houston's front office has shown a willingness to bring back familiar faces when the price is right. The real question for Houston, from a wins above replacement standpoint, is whether Springer's projected WAR contribution over the final 2 months justifies even a marginal financial and roster commitment, especially with Yordan Alvarez's spot untouchable and the outfield defense already a question mark on this roster. If Houston's internal FIP-driven pitching metrics suggest their staff can keep games close, a bat with Springer's swing decisions and situational hitting IQ, even in decline, could be the swing piece in one-run games down the stretch. That's the argument the front office is making internally, according to reporting, and it's not without merit given how tight the AL West and wild card races currently are. Bottom line, this is a move that makes sense for Toronto's long-term payroll flexibility and gives Houston a low-risk, sentimental value-add rental if the money works out in their favor. Whether it actually gets done before Monday's deadline is another matter entirely, but the framework here is realistic, and Blue Jays Nation should be watching the situation closely over the next 72 hours. If you want the fastest, most accurate breakdowns on every Blue Jays trade deadline move as it happens, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and you've got notifications turned on, because this situation is going to move fast. Drop a comment letting me know if you think Toronto should move on from Springer, and I'll see you in the next one.